All right, so we're going to just jump right in here. Good evening to everyone, and welcome to our first community meeting for the Design Guideline Phase 2 update. Tonight's topic will be windows. I'm Jessie White, and I'm a senior city planner with Landmark Preservation, and I'm joined by Abby Cressman, who is a principal city planner with Landmark Preservation. And Abby, if you'll click to the next slide. So since you're joining via Zoom, here are just a few audio tips that may be helpful as you go through this presentation with us tonight. Those include applying a background noise suppression, testing your speakers and adjusting the volume. And if you want to speak, you'll have to select the mute or unmute button. That's the microphone icon at the bottom of the screen. Other microphone options are to select the speaker and mic devices, and then you can test your microphone and speakers. And if you have any additional audio issues, then we recommend that you switch to your phone for audio. Next slide. So we'd like to go over just a few web-based rules for our webinar, or not our webinar, for our meeting tonight. We do ask that everyone participate and that we be respectful of one another. We also ask that comments be kept down to 1 to 2 minutes so that everybody has a chance to speak. This will be a highly interactive presentation tonight, and this is how we're gathering information for our guideline updates. We'll be using Mentimeter, so you can join and take part in the survey that's on Mentimeter by visiting menti.com and entering the code 3740-8921. And if you miss anything, this will be recorded and we will be posting it to our YouTube page. You can move to the next slide. Thank you. So just to give you a little background, Landmark is a 10-member team, 7 of which will be working primarily on the Phase 2 design guideline updates. That team includes Jennifer Capetto, Brittany Bryant, Abby Cressman, me, Crystal Marquez, Bridget Trujillo, and not pictured here, but our latest teammate is Andrew Abbey. Phase 2 of the design guideline update will be composed of 4 parts, starting with Windows, which is tonight, and then it'll move on to ADUs, and then accessibility, site work, and small accessory structures, and we'll round it off with updates to signage. So let's jump into our first Menti question. Give everyone a chance to log in. Again, that code is at the top of the screen if you need to join, and it's menti.com. And our question is, what is your connection to preservation in Denver? Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. So we do have a lot of ground to cover, and we are going to focus tonight's presentation primarily on research that we've collected regarding windows and what other cities are doing for windows. But before we dive into that, and I'll just wait and see, it looks like we've got a few more people adding in here. Before we jump into that, I'm going to cover what our current Denver Landmark Design Guidelines say about windows, and I'll cover also what our review process looks like. And we'll start out. So there are 3 guidelines that deal with windows or window replacement primarily. The first of which is 2.16, and that basically states preserve historic window materials, paying close attention to historic features such as stained glass or leaded glass. And this guideline really encourages repair rather than replacement when possible. And then next slide. The next guideline is guideline 2.19, and this guideline covers when historic window replacement is necessary. So that's when windows are deteriorated beyond repair. And I want you to put a pin in the phrase beyond repair. We do realize that that's not really clearly defined in our guidelines, but Abby will be going over what other research says about this type of phrase and in just a little bit. So back to 2.19, this guideline states that If a historic window is beyond repair, then replacement may be allowed, but the replacement should match the window's appearance, size, type, operation, profile, and inset with the historic window on the building. And then it goes on to say that to identify appropriate replacement materials, and those include wood and aluminum clad wood for replacing historic wood windows, and steel or aluminum for replacing historic steel windows. The guideline also covers not altering window openings on street-facing walls of the building. We can move on to the next slide. And then the final guideline that deals with windows is 2.20. This guideline deals with replacement of missing or non-historic windows. So this guideline is primarily driven by evidence. So if there are historic windows remaining on the building, you use them as a guide for replacing non-historic windows, matching the historic appearance, size, type, operation, profile, and inset depth. If there are no historic windows left on a building, say it's a building where they've replaced all the windows at some point or another, and there's no historic material left, then you look at using photographic evidence or looking at similar projects or properties in and around the district to match your windows to. So like guideline, the guideline before, so 2.19, 2.20 recommends using traditional materials such as wood or aluminum clad wood and steel or aluminum. Next slide. So now let's move on to what our current window replacement review process looks like. And then I'll turn it over to Abby to cover research and additional Menti questions. So this process can be broken down into two tracks. We have the administrative review track and we have the Landmark Preservation Commission review track. The administrative review is reserved for projects that are collectively replacing less than 3 historic windows, and they aren't on the primary facade. And they aren't highly decorative windows like leaded glass windows. Staff can also approve administratively non-historic window replacement, so long as it's replaced with traditional materials, which I covered previously. And then the administrative process, just to give you a timeline, typically takes 5 to 10 business days once a complete application is submitted. And then keep in mind that windows that are approved for replacement must be damaged beyond repair or non-historic. And then the second piece or review track would be Landmark Preservation Commission review. And this is reserved for applicants who are collectively replacing more than 3 historic windows, replacing windows on the front of the house, replacing ornate windows such as leaded glass or stained glass, or proposing to use a non-traditional window material. So if you're replacing more than 3 historic windows, you'll need to have a historic window evaluation completed by an outside third-party professional that will not benefit financially from the replacement of the windows. The third-party professional will need to include a window condition matrix and a narrative describing the assessor's experience with reviewing historic materials and an assessment of the window's conditions. In addition to the matrix and the assessment, window comparison sheets must be submitted showing how closely the proposed windows match the historic windows on the building. And once staff has that complete application, we work to schedule applicants for the next available LPC meeting. That's typically a 4-week filing process. And again, windows are reviewed on a window by window basis, and the window's conditions must be damaged beyond repair to support replacement, or they must be non-historic, being replaced with a traditional material. So after reviewing the landmark guidelines and process, I would like to outline some of the challenges that we've heard from applicants. And those include that the process is too rigid, the information required to replace historic windows is too detailed, that it is difficult to put together a complete application with all the required materials, and that it's too difficult to get an assessment by a qualified process. Sometimes that process can be very time consuming, among several other challenges. And we just wanted to take a second to really acknowledge that we have been hearing these types of comments over the years, and that's why we're working to address them in the guideline updates. So now I'm going to turn it over to Abby to go over research for other cities and some additional Minty questions.
Hey, thanks, Jesse. So just wanted to share where our window guidelines come from. So our design guidelines and the design guidelines of most communities across the United States are based on the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. So the standards, or specifically standard 6, it says that any deteriorated historic features should be repaired rather than replaced, and only where features are too damaged, the deterioration is so severe that it can't be repaired, only then should you have replacements. And if something has to be replaced, the replacement should match the old in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities, and where possible, materials. So this provides kind of the basis for why our design guidelines are currently the way they are. It's based on this standard. But there's a lot of variation across the US in how communities interpret those standards. So we really wanted to see what other communities were doing as we were kind of dealing with feedback that we've heard as we dug into this update project. We wanted to see what other cities were doing when it came to Windows. So for this Windows update, we looked at other major cities across the US, specifically looked at other cities then within our region and other cities that have really strong preservation programs. So we looked at 20 cities across the US reviewing their design guidelines as they relate to Windows and their window replacement requirements and processes. So going to present here just a summary of what we saw from those other cities, and then also what we thought were some of the interesting features to consider. So looking at these other cities, there were 3 that did not review the condition of windows at all. So they didn't worry about that part of the standards that said windows needed to be too deteriorated to replace. They didn't require that. There were 6 cities that do have guidelines that state that windows should only be replaced when they're too deteriorated, but they didn't define what too deteriorated was. Then there are 8 cities that either define too deteriorated or require an assessment, similar to what Landmark requires now. And then there were 3 cities that only require assessment for certain windows or certain locations. So you have to do an assessment if it's a special window, which we'll be talking about later, or if it's a really visible window, but you don't have to do an assessment for other locations. So for an example, San Antonio. So they give a pretty clear outline of what is repairable and what is not. So they consider a repairable window one that just has glass are missing or broken, where the meeting rails aren't aligned, cords are broken or hardware is missing, has sections of sill frame that's rotted, or has partially rotted rails or stiles. So basically things that could be patched, things that could have certain elements replaced without needing to replace the entire window. San Antonio defines windows that are beyond repair as ones that are really missing whole components or units, have really extreme wood rot, or where 50% or more of a window's components would require reconstruction. And this 50% is a percentage that I saw in a lot of guidelines. So pretty much all those guidelines that define too deteriorated, 50% was one, kind of definition we found a lot, that if more than 50% of the parts of the window were going to have to be replaced, then that was when you could replace the entire window. So time to get some more feedback. What do you think? Should our guidelines define what it means for a window to be deteriorated beyond repair? So would you like us to include a clear Sorry, would you like us to include a clear definition? Is too deteriorated something that should be reviewed on a case by case basis? Or should we just really not be reviewing condition at all? So again, if you haven't logged onto Minty yet, you can see up there the code. So you just go to minty.com and then you put in that code 37408921. Okay, so far it looks like the majority is going for we should really provide a clear definition of what is, what we consider too deteriorated to repair. Okay. Okay. You will go on to the next one then. Oh, we've got a few more votes there. Again, spreading it out a little bit more balanced there. Great. And we do have Minty. One of the great things about using Minty is it does provide results for us after. So we will, all the results that you are, putting in and recording during this presentation, we'll have those, a printout of all of those afterwards for us to use as we're working on our guideline update. So I just want to say thanks so much for, entering your responses in Minty, and we will be referring to them. Then next, what do you think is the best way to determine if a window is deteriorated beyond repair? Just photographic documentation, looking at a percentage of damage, like 50%, hiring a professional to do an evaluation, a combination of A, B, and C, like all of those are allow replacement regardless of condition. Give everyone a little time to enter your answers. Okay. Thank you. So one of the next things we looked at when we were looking at other cities is to see what they said about visibility. One of the interesting things we found in a lot of other guidelines is that they really incorporated visibility into guidelines. So for 12 cities, they really used visibility. So it was really, kind of one standard for replacement if a window was very visible, but more flexibility if the window was not visible. And then we had 8 communities that didn't really differentiate. They had the same requirements for materials, the replacement, regardless of where the windows were located. So really, we're interested by this and maybe, thinking about how we might incorporate more guidelines based on visibility to really focus on, preserving what are the most visible windows. So as we looked at visibility, there were kind of different ways that we found that communities addressed visibility. In Austin, Boulder, and Charlotte, we found it was interesting. Here, they really focused on the facade, and if a window on the facade was too damaged to be repaired, they encourage you to move. If there were historic windows elsewhere in the building, they encourage you to move those, potentially from the rear to the front, and then replace the rear windows, but always trying to, kind of preserve visible historic windows. Then as you see, quite a few cities really provided more flexibility if it was a rear or secondary elevation, as far as when replacement was allowed. Other communities gave flexibility on what materials were used on the rear or secondary elevation. And some cities then also use that as determining what had to go to the commission versus what could be reviewed administratively, basing that on visibility. So looking at the various design guidelines, there kind of seem to be 3 main approaches to how to consider visibility. One was pretty much just based on facades or elevation. So if it is an interior lot, visible windows would just be considered those on the front facade. And if it's a corner lot, visible windows would be considered those on the facade and on the side facing the street. Some cities we found use a tiered system. So here they consider tier 1 windows to be visible, and tier 1 windows are those that are on the front of the house, as well as at first room depth on each side. So kind of wrapping that corner to the first room, those would also be considered visible, but the other windows would be, kind of have more flexibility for replacement. And then finally, some communities really use sightlines. So looking at what is visible, from the public right away, from the street. So that shows, looking at sightlines, things could vary a lot depending on the lot placement, whether or not you have a large side yard, how close the neighboring properties are. So this, using sightlines is a much more kind of case by case evaluation. So if we were to, kind of incorporate more consideration of visibility in our window review, how do you think visible windows should be determined? So we just base it on visible windows or those on primary facade or a kind of corner lot secondary facade. Use tier 1 and tier 2, so that kind of the front and um, the first rooms on either side. Use sight lines or allow replacement regardless of location. Okay, great. Thank you. And we were curious to see what you thought about this concept that we found in some of the guidelines, that if you wanted to replace a window on the facade, but you had historic windows that were in good condition elsewhere, that you would move those buildings like from the rear to the front. So what do you think about that? Should Landmark encourage owners to replace damaged facade windows um, with historic windows from other less visible locations? Okay, thanks. Okay, we also looked at whether or not other cities based their review on the significance of the building. So, are the significance of the windows. So, we found that basically half the cities we looked at, their guidelines, took significance into consideration when they're looking at window replacement. And then in the other half, they really didn't consider significance. They treated all historic windows the same. So for the ones that did address significance, we found Albuquerque, Baltimore, Boulder, Charlotte, El Paso, New York, and Salt Lake. Based it on the individual building. So which windows on the building were character defining features. So if a window is considered a character defining feature, probably meant it was also one that's a feature that's more visible. Those were the ones that they really needed, they were going to look at more stringently, really encouraged repair. In some other cities, Austin, New Orleans, and DC, they based it on the building's level of significance. So it depended on, did window evaluation differently depending on, was it an individually designated building or was it just a contributing building, and kind of use that to determine how they were going to look at window replacement. So you can see here kind of an example of varying review processes. So you have Boulder on the left. So there you can see it really kind of depends, how historic the window is based on how visible it is. And that gives you kind of an outline of where, what should be repaired versus where replacement is allowed. The example on the right is from New Orleans, and there the S stands for a significant building. Then they have C is contributing, N is non-contributing. So their review is really based on different guidelines for what they call their significant buildings. They're just a contributing building or a non-contributing. We also looked at several cities that really call out special windows. This is something we're thinking about incorporating into our guidelines. This idea that to just really focus on the kind of the unique or special windows and kind of have more flexibility elsewhere. That's what's done in these 4 cities that we looked at that include special windows. So first off, it's Baltimore. So they kind of give preference to preserving special windows, and they define special windows as being custom designed or crafted, have a high degree of styling, and examples are stained glass windows, windows with curved glass, arch windows, or windows of unusual configuration. New York City also kind of requires higher level of review for special windows than just kind of non-distinctive windows. So in New York City, they define special windows as having a rare shape, distinctive patterns, distinctive glazing, fine craftsmanship, distinctive materials, a unique typology, or being especially old. Salt Lake City also uses special windows in their design guidelines. They define special windows as having unusual shapes, such as circular windows, having distinct glazing patterns, such as diamond panes or multi-paned subdivided windows, are associated very strongly with a particular building style. So a window that's really key to a building style. And then finally, Washington, D.C., of the ones we looked at, also uses special windows. So they define special windows as really being key to the architectural style, custom designs that are not typically found in a manufacturer's catalog. So some of the examples they provide, non-rectilinear frames or sashes, have transoms or side lights, unusual pane configurations, multi-pane configurations, curved, stained, or leaded glass, decorative or carved sashes, are projecting bays or oriels. So we'd like to see what you think about this idea of having distinct guidelines for special windows. So should we have different guidelines for the replacement of special windows versus kind of giving more flexibility to the replacement of common window types? Okay, so far we seem it's unanimous here. So it looks like we'll definitely be looking at some developing some special window guidelines. Okay, thank you for that feedback. Then we also like to see what other cities said about materials. So particularly we were curious, one of the things we often, hear is that people wish they could use vinyl windows. Certainly a lot of people, ask for vinyl windows. Vinyl windows are not something we currently allow in any of our historic districts. So we wanted to see what other cities said about vinyl. We found 6 other cities explicitly say in their guidelines that vinyl is not allowed. In 2, vinyl's allowed in some locations, so would never be allowed on a facade, but might be allowed on a rear. In 9 of the cities, they don't address vinyl in the guidelines. And in 3, any application for vinyl is a case by case and has to go to the commission for review. So what do you think? Do you think our guidelines should specify which materials are allowed, or should materials be reviewed on a case-by-case basis? Okay, thank you. Then looking into the kind of getting into the details, those window elements that make up the distinctive profile of a window. So we found several design guidelines can get into quite a bit of detail of preserving the profile. So that includes all those different building elements, their dimensions, um, the inset into the wall plane, and the design of the window muntin. So for example, we found really you know, no other cities really allow ones that only have the dividers within the glass. All of them pretty much required that you have that external muntin in order to have more of that distinctive profile. So some of the other guidelines we found referring to window profiles. So for example, Fort Collins matched the profile of the sash muntin and its components to the historic window, including the depth of the sash, which may step back to the plane of the glass in several increments. And in Houston, guidelines say select a similar profile and depth of trim, as well as the arrangement and number of layers of trim from the frame to the glass. Not allowing any flat boards and making sure that all windows are recessed in the wall. So what elements do you think are most important to be matched when replacing historic windows? And you can pick more than one. So pick all of these that you think we should really be requiring to be matched. That could be matching the material, matching the size and proportions, the trim, the operation. So is it a sash window? Is it a casement window? Is it a fixed window? The light pattern, does it have divided lights? And the inset into the wall. So is it flush with the wall, or is it inset as historic windows were commonly situated?
Abby, I was just going to say real quick that Minty question won't let you pick more than one.
Okay, thank you. We'll be sure to get that fixed. And that explains then why everyone says size and proportions. So thanks. Okay, Jesse?
All right. So as we move into our final section of the meeting, I'd like to go over just a few considerations to keep in mind when thinking about sustainability and window replacement. The first of which is how much energy is actually lost or truly lost through windows. And most studies show that I've seen around 10%, which isn't a lot compared to other areas of loss like fireplaces, or ducts, or at plumbing penetrations and wall or floor, wall, and ceilings. So it only accounts for a small percentage. The second and third considerations to keep in mind is material and construction. So most historic windows are constructed using high quality old growth wood materials that can be maintained and repaired over time. And that's limiting the amount of material that's going into the landfill. And it also minimizes the damaging impact that continual window replacement can have on a building over time. And then finally, historic windows have an embodied energy value. And what I mean by that is that the energy that goes into the extraction of raw materials, production and transportation of windows, the use of the windows or the lifetime of the windows, and ultimately the disposal of those windows, that's embodied energy. And oftentimes restoring existing historic windows conserves that embodied energy and reduces the use of additional energy needed to make replacement windows. And those are just a few things to keep in mind. I know not everybody is coming from a place where they have historic windows in their home, but keeping in mind energy efficiency, materials, construction, and embodied energy can be applied to non-historic windows as well, and can be applied when thinking about what replacement materials to use.
Okay. So in doing the research, we found that uh, many of the cities we looked at included some kind of general guidance on sustainability in their guidelines, even though it's often wasn't something that was actually incorporated into their requirements. It was more included, information within their guidelines. But we did find a few examples where cities included kind of sustainability within their guidelines. So, for example, Austin said that historic windows on non-street facing walls could be replaced for energy efficiency if other high impact energy efficiency upgrades had already been made or were included in the same project. In New York City, historic windows on non-street facing walls could be replaced for energy efficiency. Oh, sorry, that's an error there. In New York City, they basically allowed some other window operations as long as you were using a more efficient window type and you could match it so it looked like it had the same operation as the original, even if it didn't, but could replicate it from the exterior. That was allowed. And then found it interesting in Plano, they specifically state in their guidelines that no replacement of historic windows solely for energy efficiency is allowed. That instead they encourage weather stripping, sealing joints, installing more efficient equipment, and insulation. So this is a statement that was included in the Telluride design guidelines. So we are just curious to see what you think, how well you agree or disagree with it. So basically, restoring and preserving historic windows is more sustainable and cost effective, given the relatively short life and material quality of replacement windows, which need to be replaced much more frequently than historic windows. So just rank on the bar how much you agree or disagree with this statement. Okay, and then finally, we just wanted to give you a chance to give your feedback. So we'll take additional questions and stuff, and we're happy to discuss more in a moment. But we just love to get, this is just kind of open answer. Are there things that you would like to see in our window guidelines and review process? So are any of these, kind of elements that we highlighted from other design guidelines, are any of these ones that you'd like to see us incorporate? Is there anything else that you would really like to see addressed in this window guideline update? So give everyone a few minutes here to think and give your feedback. Okay, so far, some of the things we're hearing, as much preservation aesthetically as possible, encourage partially infilled windows to be restored to original proportions, like to see detailed guidance on storm windows, differentiate between remarkable windows, undistinctive structures, and ordinary 1/1 double hung. So yeah, kind of looking at special or character windows, consider the cost of repair and maintaining older windows, um, proposals for when historic windows are replaced to not landfill those items. That would be great to see. Definitely some cities do have deconstruction ordinances where they require that any building materials that can be reused, they require that those be reused. San Antonio recently passed a deconstruction ordinance. Okay. Thanks. I'm going to turn it over to Jesse to wrap things up, and then we're available for any questions you have.
All right, thank you so much. So as we're looking ahead, next steps for the window design guideline update specifically, those include our topic-based community meetings. So in this case, windows. We have another in-person meeting next Tuesday at 6:30, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone. We will also be collecting survey input from the community so that we can add that in, as well as what we've collected here tonight at the during the Menti survey, and general comments and questions at the end of the meeting. And then we'll create an internal draft. Then the next step after that is that that draft is then reviewed as a public draft and is edited, and then we go into final adoption. And of course, if you forgot a question or forgot anything, and you wake up at midnight and you want to reach out to us, please feel free to do that. We can be reached on our webpage at denvergov.org/landmark, by email, landmark@denvergov.org, or our general landmark phone line, which is 720-865-2709. And then, as I was talking about before, here are 2 QR codes. If you want to click over to the next slide, Abby. There they are. These are our survey links. So you can scan those on your phone. We really encourage you to take those surveys so that we have additional information that helps to guide us as we make updates to the guidelines. Thank you for joining us for this part of the presentation. I think we can open it up now for questions or comments.
Do you mind if I go?
Absolutely, Ozzy.
Yeah, and I've been kind of defending the current landmark window policies for years now, but now that we are having this meeting, I feel really excited about the possibility of introducing some more flexibility for the great majority of the windows in our neighborhoods. A lot of stupid things have been done to the windows on our houses already that we may need to fix or replace. And if I look at 90% of the windows in my neighborhood, if somebody replaced those with a high quality clad wood double hung window, it's probably not going to hurt the historic character of the neighborhood very much. And there's still a category of very special ones that you were talking about. And I think that could be a really productive direction for the design guideline revision. And I think generally this process, one thing I'm hoping for is we just see a lot of people get frustrated with the landmarks process or decide not to engage with it and tear out their windows and replace them with crap. And I think introducing more room and more flexibility in the process, I think could help prevent some of that from happening. So I think that could be a great outcome.
Thank you. Harmony?
Hi, I'm making dinner. Let's see. I am the co-chair of the Mayor's Sustainability Advisory Council for Environmental Justice, and I live in a house that was built in 1909. I can tell you that when the wind blows in my bedroom outside, the curtains blow in the inside of the house. Because I am a single divorced mom of 2 children and I work in the nonprofit sector, I income qualified for a program that was going to replace my windows for me because my son has respiratory issues. And then they went through this process and they found out how much it was going to cost and that they would have to not do vinyl windows and things like that. And they said, we will not do this for you. I think we really, really need to consider. I also work in the Elyria, Swansea, and Globeville neighborhoods. It is really hard for people just to make it in Denver. And as air quality continues to get worse, and especially a lot of people who have been burdened and living in pollutions with a lot of, who have been burdened by living in neighborhoods with a lot of pollution, we need more to protect the indoor quality for people. And we need things to actually be good, not just look good. But I agree, keeping the front facade makes a lot of sense. I've been to lots of historic towns. I've went through the building process in the historic district of Crested Butte. I love an old house. That's why I have one. But there comes a time where my son's ability to breathe and people with asthma and other things needs to be more important than how, how the windows look in the back of your home.
I did want to chime in just real quickly and address, we do have incentives for window replacement or for historic window restoration. Those can be applied to storm windows for historic windows, window restoration, and it can also be applied to replacement. And that is our preservation tax credit, which is currently 25% for residential structures. So just putting that out there for everyone.
But if it's $40,000 to replace your windows and you're already a single mom trying to make it in Denver, it's still a no-go.
100%.
Joe, would you like to speak? You have your hands raised.
You're not unmuted, Joe.
Sorry, thank you. So I'm a homeowner in the Potter Highlands neighborhood. I have an 1887 home, and I currently am slowly refinishing those home windows. I will say that unfortunately, my storm windows did not survive the last 130 years along the way, but I was able to get those, and they made a huge difference, and they were custom made, relatively cheap, surprisingly enough. I was very surprised at that, and it has made a significant difference. So one of my comments is certainly to ensure or suggest that the requirements and the changes speak to storm windows, which I don't think they currently do, because that does make a huge difference in energy efficiency and whatnot. So the other point that I wanted to ask about or talk about is that tax credit doesn't help most homeowners. I am currently restoring my windows, and because I'm doing the work, I can't apply for that credit. So those storm windows came out of my pocket. The materials, the glass, everything else that I've got to source to fix my windows, I get no credit for. I'm still doing it because I like it and I love the house, but that might be a deterrent for other folks, particularly those that have the ability but may not have the money to fix them. Thank you.
Just a clarification on the tax credits. You're right that if you're doing it yourself, a lot of that, like your labor doesn't count, but you could apply for, if you're ordering custom design replica storms, that is something that would qualify. Or if you're building them yourself, you're purchasing the materials to do those storms, would qualify for the tax credit.
Yeah, but the labor, unfortunately, is kind of.
You're right.
There should be some thought in that. Yeah, because the materials, when you get to actually building them, raw materials it doesn't get that high. Piece of wood is not that expensive.
That is sadly, one area there that doesn't quite work for that. But just any materials would qualify. And also just currently we don't review storms, so anyone can put on, storms, and we don't, because we encourage those. So we don't currently have guidelines for storms because we say that storms are great and we don't review them. Did anyone else have their hands raised?
I just one quick, if nobody else has got anything on the storms, it's kind of ironic that you require all the original materials on the regular windows, but I can throw a vinyl storm on it if I so choose, which is odd.
Basically, we look at that because that's something that's completely reversible and isn't, if you, art isn't, is easily changed and isn't impacting the original structure. But understand that.
I'm going to add on to this too with storms. I have 2 windows that open in my whole living area of my house and 2 in the basement. And I don't know if you can even see them, but they're like vinyl, and I don't know when these got put on. So the fact that I can't replace in the back of my house one that matches the one in the downstairs of my house is, again, the contradictions are just a lot. And I really think that that's ridiculous to me. And the person who's doing this whole new build 2 doors down is doing this all vinyl and all things in their backyard. And every house looks so incredibly different house to house. That, again, as a mom with a child with breathing issues, I am like begging you guys to really reconsider what things look like on the back sides, especially when there's already other vinyls in those spaces. And please don't come to my house and ask me to take vinyl windows out now.
No,
Oh, so just for
we appreciate your feedback.
Yep, for clarification, windows that are existing, unless they were put in without permits, if they were put in prior to the district being designated, or if they were put in prior to our current design guidelines, we don't police neighborhoods to find violations. That's not what we're about. But if you are to replace your if you are to replace your vinyl windows, your existing vinyl windows, it would need to meet our current guidelines.
Jesse, do we have time to do a quick case study or interest?
I'm not sure what that means, Patrick, but Daisy does have her hand raised, so we'll come back to you in 1 second.
Okay, thank you.
Daisy, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to say, because I am struggling the same as the single mom. I'm not a single mom. We are struggling in the same situation. We have vinyl storms on our windows. They are ugly. I would love for them to come down and put on. I remodeled a house in a non-historic neighborhood, but in a historic neighborhood with they were vinyl windows, but they were wood faced, so you could not tell at all that they were not original. Nobody knew. And they looked great. I conserved a ton of energy. I kept the boiler. I kept the radiant heat. I preserved everything about the house, and I'm all about preservation. But I'm looking around my neighborhood, and I am the person who has gone through Landmark to ask for window replacement and for permission on my remodel. And I am watching all the other neighbors with new vinyl windows. And because I've asked permission, seem to be punished by not getting the windows I want. Even the single pane. I have a single pane in a historic, I don't even think it was original window. I have a single pane that is literally like the wind just flies through there. A single pane window, no frame or anything. I can't even replace that. I can't replace these crappy, they're not even, I think they're metal in my kitchen. Everything has been blocked for what I want to do. And it feels a lot like when I wish that what Landmark would do is say, oh, look, in this particular block, every single person has vinyl windows and has popped out their windows, except for this one house. So in that vein, is this house now not in keeping? Are we not preserving the integrity of the neighborhood by not allowing this person to switch out their windows or take off their storms or whatever it is? It just feels super frustrating that those of us who ask for permission no one works with us. No one takes into account the prohibitive cost of doing repair on these original windows. No one takes into account, the fact that we want to stay here. I have owned a house in Potter Highlands and I have remodeled historic homes for 14 years. And this is the first time I've ever encountered so much resistance to a remodel. And I'm trying to stay. Is the irony of the situation. I'm trying to stay. And right now, because of all these factors that are being blocked by Landmark, we are looking at moving out of the neighborhood because I want this to be someone else's problem. And I think people are going to continue to feel that way unless we feel like there's some sort of give and take happening. And right now, I feel like I'm doing all the giving and Landmark is doing zero to have any sort of give and take with me. And it's super frustrating. And I just want you to know, like, I'm not individual in this. Most of the people I know who have done renovations in these historic neighborhoods feel the way that I do. And we want to stay. So I just want that to be like really, really, I wish that Landmark would say, okay, we need to treat these people as people that we want to stay here and not block you and say, thank you for working with us. We will work with you. And I feel like super frustrated that doesn't happen.
Thanks for your comments and your feedback. I just want to say our review is based on our guidelines. And so that's why we are here. We are trying to work with you by updating our guidelines. So we encourage you to continue to give us feedback throughout the process. We'll have drafts of the guidelines up. Encourage you, other people that have comments to come to the meeting next week or to fill out the survey online, because that's what this is for, is to update the process. We can't just arbitrarily decide, currently the way the guidelines are set up, that's the guidelines for everyone. And, but we are working on providing more flexibility. So this is the, route to give us feedback for us to be able to look at updates and changes to the guidelines.
So
Have comments?
So it is almost 7 o'clock, which is the end time for this meeting. We all greatly appreciate your feedback. As my colleagues Abby and Jesse have said, this update is to address some of those concerns we've been hearing from the community about lack of flexibility and some of those stricter things while still adhering to the Secretary of Interior standards. I see that Gertie just raised her hand, so I will cede the floor to her.
Yeah, I'm sorry to chime in so late because I've not attended any of these before, but I am hearing from a neighbor who is in a historic district in just north of Spear Boulevard north of Alameda in the West Wash Park neighborhood. And I think the frustration about meeting the guidelines, particularly when the windows have previously been replaced with vinyl, is in my opinion, I don't know how you resolve this issue, but I do think it is making it harder and harder for those of us who want to see more houses designated to convince people that it's worth the time and the effort, because it's becoming so expensive, particularly to repair windows. And it just, I don't know how to resolve it. I'm just really sympathizing with what the two previous people have said.
So just to conclude, this is our first in-person, first meeting focused on Windows for the update. We will have an in-person meeting next week on September 12th. It will be held in the Carla Madison. It will be very similar content to this meeting, so if you have neighbors who were not able to attend this meeting, we would love to have them for the in-person meeting. We also have a survey that is up on our website, and the QR links were provided, and I did provide those links in the chat. If you could provide us information on, or if you could take that survey, that will provide us additional information on how to update the design guidelines. The questions are not exactly the same as the Menti questions that you saw in the presentation today, and some of them are focused more on materials and where flexibility should be given. So participating in that survey is very helpful, as it does help guide how we will do the drafting and updates for this section of the design guidelines.
Thank you all for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks everyone for joining us tonight.
Thank you all.
Thanks, bye.